Morning to those of you who have joined. I'm just going to wait till we get to 11 o'clock before I start. So a couple more minutes. It's reached 11 o'clock, so I'm going to make a start on today's webinar. So we're looking today at top tips for remote working. I think I'm sharing my screen with you. I hope I'm sharing my screen with you. So we'll kick off with the slides. If you bear with me just one moment while I arrange my technology. So to start, I will introduce myself and the team. My name is Sarah Hudson. I am a business partner with Clover HR. Clover has been around for a while now, and I have been with them on this journey for some time. We're your trusted people advisors, and we're here to help in any way that we can. We have over 150 years experience between the team, so we can ensure you get the best advice and service. We're able to provide value support in a number of areas. So we have specialisms in areas of people from recruitment, training, coaching, well-being, reward, and many other people strategies. A picture on your screen was taken at our last team meeting back in March when we were able to see each other. We have a few new members of the team since then, and at some point, hopefully, we will be able to get together and get a new team photo. But for now, this is us. Just to say, there is a question and answer function available on the webinar. If you do have any questions, please do type them in. My apologies in advance if I am unable to answer the questions at the time. If I don't, I'll try and come back to you on email. And again, if you have any questions that you would like to put, please feel free to put those onto email as well. And we'll respond to those. I think I have set it so that everybody's muted, but if I haven't, if you wouldn't mind muting your microphones, just to make it an easier experience for everybody. And just to go over the contents of today's webinar and what we'll be looking at. So we are looking at top tips from remote working. These are tips for employees working remotely. It's tips for managers on how to manage a remote team, staying safe, holding meetings, and legal points to consider with remote working. So I'm going to start off with some helpful tips for employees working remotely. So I'm going to go through the slides, just run through these points that are up there and talk in a little bit more detail about them. So first of all, having a designated workspace. This is really important that you have your own space for working, a separate space for yourself to work in, somewhere you can focus on tasks without being distracted. It's not easy for everybody. It depends on people's home setups and circumstances. But even if it's just a corner of a room that is for your working environment, it does help to have this as a designated space. Equipment. So ensuring you have all the equipment you need. So a normal day's work, you will need things such as your computer, obviously, phone, stationery, paper, etc. So it's making sure that you have all these readily available, making sure you have all the tech that you need. So this includes a reliable and secure internet connection, any necessary files that you may need sent from the office, hardware and software, remote access to a company network, and importantly, knowledge of how to get IT support if needed. So if you have the disaster that you're on a Zoom and all goes wrong, you can phone somebody and you know you'll be able to get a response. Next point, getting dressed. It seems very obvious, but it is a key point. Changing into work clothes will help you mentally switch into a productive work mode. It changes your environment from being at home to a work environment, even though you're not leaving the house. It helps distinguish between home working and home life. Our next point is getting organised. So, and this is also keeping organised, so keeping into the rhythm of the organisation that you have. For example, write a daily to-do list, set out a list of realistic and achievable tasks to keep you focused. And remember to stop. Breaks are really important, and it's something when you're in your home environment that often you forget to do. Know when to step away from your desk. Be clear about when your working day begins and when it ends, and take breaks to refresh. It's easy to let yourself be always on when you're at home and the office is the same place. When work is over, make sure that you switch off to avoid burnout. Think about having core hours as you would in a normal working day, and make sure that people around you know what those core hours are. Communicate. So stay in conversation with people, and it is harder to do when you're working from home. Contribute regularly to team chats or group emails so that you don't drop off the radar. Ask about what people are working on. Share what's on your plate. Being physically separated means that you miss a lot of the casual chat, the water cooler moments. So this means you need to keep yourself informed about what is going on. Foster relationships. So make time for non-work chats, just like you would in the working environment. Use video calls to maintain face-to-face contact, because it does make a difference whether you can see somebody's reactions and to whether you're just talking on the phone. Make sure that you're clear in communication, and this is something we'll talk about from a manager's point of view later on. Speaking in person gives those visual and audio cues that help with communication. Conversing remotely removes a lot of the extra information that you would get naturally. So you need to make sure that your communication is extra clear and that you're being concise in what you're saying. Enjoy the advantages. And this is something that I think it's worth focusing on. Make remote working work for you. Change where you sit, put on some music, whatever helps you be comfortable and be able to work as well. Enjoy the perks. So you don't have a commute. You can wear comfortable shoes. You can sit on your comfortable chair. You can make it work for you, but do remember to keep it as a work environment when you are doing that. And the final point on here is to ask for help. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on this in the next slide. This is a key thing to remember, to ask for help, and it's something that many people don't do. There are things to get over. For example, don't be embarrassed in asking for help. Speak out when you need assistance, further training, any kind of support. Your manager, colleagues, and you are part of a team, and you need to be supporting each other, especially at the moment when people are feeling very fragile. Find out what support you can get, what's available for you, whether you can do that through your employer or whether you can just go onto the internet and see there are many, many blogs out there of helpful tips and directing you to support places. Make a wellness action plan. So this is looking at what works for you and how you can improve the conditions while you're working from home. So there's examples that can be taken from the Mind website, and the link to that is given on your screen. So it's mind.org.uk. They've got a lot of literature on what you can do to set up a wellness action plan, to look for support, and it's a great source of help. And it's something you might not be needing, but perhaps it's something that you could recommend to somebody else if they're struggling or if they're looking for some support. So the next section we're going to be looking at is managing a remote team. So these are the 4 areas I'm going to explore in a bit more detail. So firstly, knowing your team. Secondly, communicating with your team. Thirdly, setting expectations. And fourthly, sharing. So knowing your team. Understand individual situations. Remind your team about the big picture and how their work fits into it. Review short-term goals regularly and adjust these as needed. If some members can't carry out all their usual work, consider other skills that they can lend to meeting team goals. Everybody is an individual and everybody is having an individual response to this pandemic. And it's keeping in contact with people so that you understand how it is impacting on them. Make sure that everyone has what they need to work remotely. So this is going back to our first slide, making sure that you've got all your equipment, you've got the IT support. And this also includes any coaching that a person may need to support their online systems. So they may need some coaching on IT or about how to work remotely. So some constructive help on setting action goals or to-do lists even. So it's just making sure that everybody is able to work effectively. Communicating. So this is, as we've discussed previously, a big factor, particularly for a manager working with a team. You need to ensure all members of the team understand how you'll be working together and agree to it. So make sure everyone's clear. What do they need to do remotely? How often do they need to keep you updated as the manager? How often do they need to keep the team updated? And what does the content of that look like? Stay connected. Have a daily huddle, a virtual huddle. It's essential to keep the connection as a team, to check in on each other's well-being and keep the workflow on track. It doesn't need to be long, but regularity is key to this. It's that constant communication. As a manager, you should keep your calendar visible, maintain that virtual open door, be available. It's vitally important that people feel able to come and speak to you, particularly if they have issues. Keep your regular rhythm of one-to-ones and team meetings. Don't lose track of those. It maintains a sense of structure, normality, and continuity for everybody, and some people may really appreciate that. Help foster relationships and well-being. Make time for social conversations. This increases your rapport with your direct report, and it eases communication between people who may not often be able to meet via other means. And it reduces the feelings of isolation. And those feelings can run deep, so it is important that we do stay on top of communication. And then listening, finally, on this section on communication. Listening closely and reading between the lines. Not being in the same room means you don't have the extra information such as body language or tone, and so it is more difficult to get a feeling for how people are. particularly if you're having to have difficult conversations with people. It's important that you focus on what's being said and ask questions if you need to clarify your interpretation of that. It's important not to make assumptions about the communication and what is being said or not said. Our next point is setting expectations. So set clear expectations, make sure that everybody in the team understands what's required from them, what the goals are, what the workflow is for the team, and trust your team. Let them get on with it and be clear about the mutual expectations and trust. Don't micromanage because of a lack of communication. Ensure that the communication is open, and then you will be able to set your expectations. And then finally, for this section, sharing. So this kind of covers what we've talked about a little bit in communication. But it's looking at things like sharing information and encouraging your team to do the same in terms of workload. What have people got on? What are they doing with their time at home? Are they doing everything they need to do as part of the team? Share appropriate updates. Keep people up to date on what is going on in the business, because they don't have that direct line of contact by being physically in the building. And invite other people to share information that they found or useful things that they have maybe found in terms of working from home, things that work for them. And then the final point is tailoring feedback. So this is tailoring your communication. People can be more sensitive if they're feeling isolated or anxious. And this needs to be taken into account when talking to somebody, or even when putting something into writing, say by email. Communicate regularly, not just when things go wrong, whether it's information, praise, or criticism. Remote conversations can easily be misinterpreted. So it's harder to read body language, tone of voice, and other visual cues. Stay mindful of this when you're delivering difficult messages or getting feedback. Challenging times that we're in at the moment call for greater sensitivity and kindness. So the next topic I want to have a look at is staying safe, putting safety first. Just because we're not on the premises doesn't mean that we can ignore this. Covered some of these points already, but they are significant, so I'm going to go over some of them again. Risk assessments. Encourage your managers to conduct electronic risk assessments with their team to make sure that their home workplace is suitable. Make sure all workers know about your health and safety policies, and if you supply equipment, it needs to pass relevant safety tests. Employers are responsible for an employee's health and safety and welfare, even when they're working from home. You need to make sure that home workers are knowledgeable about health and safety and that they're complying with your health and safety policies. Staff should be reminded that they need to ensure suitable and safe environments where they can focus on work. Ideally, you'd conduct a physical risk assessment of all the work activities carried out. However, this is almost impossible to do at the moment. Therefore, you could use electronic risk assessments on questionnaires instead, or even do a risk assessment via Zoom. It's the employee's responsibility to address any issues that arise out of these risk assessments. Health and safety legislation does put some responsibility on the home worker to ensure that they and members of their household aren't endangered by working activities undertaken at home. So it is a two-way communication to make sure that both employer and employees' responsibilities are being met. Stepping away from the desk. So be clear about when your working day begins and ends, and take a break to refresh. When work is over, switch off the computer. You need to avoid burnout, and cultivating healthy habits such as taking exercise and fresh air every day really does increase the mental well-being. Minimising stress. So people managers have a large part to play in this. They should set clear expectations, as we've discussed previously, about the way employees should deliver and receive communications through the working day. And this will hopefully alleviate some of the pressure and anxiety around the change of working conditions. As I said previously, try a daily virtual huddle. It's essential for keeping connected, and it means that for the line manager, they can check in on their team's physical and mental well-being and discuss any additional support that they might need to fulfill their roles. Discourage presenteeism. So if you're unwell, take the time away. Do your best to give a handover as possible for urgent work, but health and safety and your well-being still takes priority. As a manager or team leader, you should be encouraging people to take the time off if they're unwell and model that behaviour yourself, which is something that managers very often don't do. And then finally, offering support. So this is in terms particularly of well-being. Organisations need to remind staff that they're of any existing health and wellbeing benefits that they might have. For example, you may have an employee assistance programme or occupational health provider in place. These should be available for the employee, and they should understand how they can access those while working remotely. A lot of the time people won't have appreciated that they have these things available because they've never needed to use them before. So offering this information rather than waiting for them to have to try and find it can be really beneficial. And the next section we move on to is holding meetings. So meetings have become part and parcel of remote working. Everybody, I think, has experience now of using Zoom or Google Meets or various other forums. So what I'm going to do is just cover some of these points, video calling, speaking, etc. So I'm going to just touch on some of these. So embrace video calling. Being present and seeing each other is a really important part of being connected. And don't hide away or do other work during meetings, but actually put your full self into the meeting. A lot of people don't like video calling. It feels slightly unnatural sometimes, but it is a really good thing to make every effort to do, as it really does make a difference to actually see people. When you are doing it, make sure that you can speak clearly. So use headphones or earphones. This can often give a better sound quality. Speak directly into the mic and remember to mute it when you're not speaking to limit background noise. Speak clearly and steadily. This helps ensure everyone can understand, and try to modulate your voice to keep people interested and engaged. It's difficult to work on this. Most of the time you do it naturally when you're having a face-to-face conversation with people, and it can feel a little bit unnatural doing it to a computer screen. So it does take a little bit of thought. Establish etiquette guidelines, and this is something that a manager may want to put in place. Agree a system that gives everyone a voice, so arrange hands up signals or agree who speaks next. And use the chat function to allow everyone to contribute. Chat boxes can be really useful. So if you need to, for example, repeat a question, the chair or presenter should repeat questions before answering a question, should go over what has just been said, to make sure that everybody has been listening and understands what the response is being given to. And the chat boxes can be used here to repeat a question in writing, just so you've got it visually. It can provide additional clarity. And remember to use people's names as well in chat boxes when responding. Repeat the remarks and make it clear who you're responding to. Others might not have seen a comment, so it's best to keep everything together within the comment, so reply in full to what the comment was and what the response is, because otherwise it can lose some sense of what's being replied to. In terms of slides, try and keep slides simple. Keep to a single thought per slide to help the participants understand and focus on what's being discussed. It's better to have more slides with fewer things on them. Keep slides visual. Your participants might be joining from a mobile device, and a lot of words is going to be very difficult to read on the screen. So make sure that you're being as clear as possible and it's as image-based as possible. Engage with your participants. It's hard just to listen for a long time when you're on an online call, and it really helps break it up to invite participants to give comments or ask questions, and going back to using tools like chats so that people can make a comment without necessarily butting into a conversation. And then just finally on holding meetings, I think it's important that you spell out clearly any actions that need to be taken and who by. Summarise the meeting and then circulate notes about what has been said, because it helps clarify the conversations and makes it more relevant to everybody. And the final point really that I wanted to go over is just some legal points, some things that both employees and employers need to have in their minds. Health and safety. Now, we've discussed this in the previous slide regarding safety, so I'm not going to go into much detail on this, but just to point out that it is a legal requirement and a moral obligation to make sure that your employees are safe at work, even though that work is now at home. Policy documents. So a review of home working policies. You should make sure that everything is up to date. This is quite a new situation, and the expectation of working from home may differ from what is currently in your policies. So you may need to tweak the policies slightly to compensate for that. You need to be discussing in those policies how employees will be supervised, how line managers will communicate, and how performance and output is going to be monitored, because these are all issues that are going to change through home working. Contractual considerations. So the home working arrangement should be confirmed by consent form. And in that, you should have detailed home working arrangements. So as previously just said, things that your policy would cover. For example, how you're going to communicate with people, how you're going to be monitoring output. And this, the home working agreement will form an amendment to the employee's contract. So it is important that both parties understand what it contains. Hours of work. So consideration should be given to working time and length of period. So I've talked previously about turning off, switching off at the end of the working day and having core hours still. Will employees need to be available for work during strict office hours or a set number of hours per day? There might be more flexibility over working from home hours, and it will depend on what works for the business. But the working time regulations always need to be in the back of the mind in terms of making sure that they're being complied with. For example, working the week and having daily rest periods. Managers should access training in order to look out for signs of overwork. Make sure that people aren't trying to do more work than they need to do to compensate for the fact that they are working from home. Some people feel uncomfortable that their work might not be being viewed as being done, so they might be doing extra work to overcompensate for this. And all these things lead to potential burnout of people. So it really is worth making sure that people are only doing the hours that they need to do. Performance monitoring. So for example, how are you going to monitor performance? Do you need timesheets? It might be worth reviewing to ensure that you've got a robust system in place to make sure that performance is being monitored, but at the same time making sure that you're not micromanaging. So for example, you may have a timesheet that you use, but does a more detailed timesheet need to be provided to break down the hours as you're not going to have any visual sight of what that person's doing. Contact. So this is looking at methods and regularity. You need to review and confirm that there are contact methods in place and whether you're doing that regularly enough. Establish a standard for regular contact and report in at regular times so you can make sure that people are well, and this can also help combat isolation and stress. Providing equipment. So there's no obligation for an employer to provide computers or other equipment to work from home, though it is best practice to do so. To protect against discrimination, all employees should be given the tools required to do their job. And it's prudent to list the equipment that's been supplied in the home working agreement or any policies, and also to photograph the condition that it's supplied in. Expenses. So this is additional costs. So changes to expenses might be appropriate to accommodate different expenses incurred. For example, calls on a private phone as people are working from home. Usually it's the employee's responsibility to check that no issue arises with mortgage providers or landlords or local authorities or home insurers regarding home working. But it is worth checking as part of your risk assessment that the employee has considered these points. With the current situation, it's hoped that any issues, for example, increases in house insurance premiums, will be minimal, but it is prudent to encourage employees to check. Contractual arrangements will need to be decided upon to look at whether the employee is expected to cover additional costs such as broadband, phone, as just said, heating and lighting. Will any of this be contributed towards by looking at your expenses policy? Do you need to review your expenses policy in light of the current situation? Ensure that current insurance covers business equipment in the home worker's premises, and if not, this might need to be amended. And it would also be worth confirming with any external IT support in terms of whose responsibility it is to follow up if there are any problems. This is particularly important if the responsibility for repair or replacement is on the employee and they're using their own equipment. And then finally, data protection. So the employees must make sure that all data protection obligations are maintained, and an employee using their own computer should still process information in compliance with data protection principles. It's worth sending a reminder to employees about home security, confidential information, passwords, shredding of documents, etc., to make sure that this is all still being complied with. To ensure robust data protection, it's worth liaising with the IT support team regarding how information is accessed remotely and to ensure that it's secure as possible. So just in summary, how we can help. So Clover can review or provide you with any documents, for example, as we've just said, expenses, home working policies and agreements. We can review or implement processes for you to make sure that you're equipped to deal with home workers, and provide advice and support for changes within your business that have come as a result of this. Thank you for listening to the webinar today. I hope it's been of interest to you. My details are on the screen now, so if you do have any questions or queries, please do feel free to get in contact with me. If you want to email me directly, that is not a problem at all, and I'll try and answer any queries that you may have. And then finally, just to thank you again for attending our webinar. We've got a number of webinars on our website, ones that we've done recently, and we have a number coming up to be done in the future. So keep an eye out for those. And if you want to be on our mailing list, please do just go onto our website and follow the links there to be put onto the mailing list. Then you'll receive up-to-date information on the webinars that we're holding. Thank you very much.